My boss fired me after 15 years, the surprise I left him caused a company-wide meltdown. Alastair Vance sat in the dimly lit corner of the bustling coffee shop, the warmth of the ceramic mug doing little to thaw the chilling vindication that had settled deep in his bones. On the large screen mounted above the barista's counter, the news anchor's voice cut through the ambient chatter, sharp and urgent. Unprecedented systems failure at Nexus Corp, with reports of highly sensitive internal documents being anonymously leaked to multiple media outlets. Sources indicate the ongoing data release is causing a company-wide meltdown, sending shares plummeting. A grim, almost predatory smile touched Alastair's lips, a rare sight that spoke volumes of the cold, calculated triumph unfurling in his chest. 15 years of quiet loyalty, brutally shattered. Now, the hunters were the hunted. Across town, in the opulent Nexus Corp boardroom, Serafina Croft's immaculate composure was finally cracking, shattering like a fragile pane of glass under immense pressure. Her hands, usually so steady as she navigated complex cybersecurity protocols, now trembled so violently the papers on the polished mahogany table rattled. She stared at the screen, her eyes wide with a terror that was raw, undisguised, and utterly damning. The CEO's face, typically a mask of corporate calm, was contorted in disbelief and fury as the latest data packet, laden with irrefutable evidence of financial impropriety and illicit data transfers, flashed across the monitors. "This is impossible," Serafina whispered, her voice barely audible, choked by rising panic. But Alastair, watching from his secluded vantage point through the digital stream, knew it was far from impossible. It was, in fact, precisely what he had engineered. The surprise he had left for them, a meticulously crafted mechanism born of 15 years of unwavering loyalty and ultimate betrayal, had finally begun its devastating work. The hunt had begun, and Alastair, once the disgraced pariah, was now the unseen predator, patiently waiting for his prey to self-destruct. The meticulously ordered world of Alastair Vance had begun its catastrophic unraveling 6 months prior, long before the news anchors uttered phrases like unprecedented systems failure. For 15 years, Nexus Corp had been his sanctuary, his proving ground, his very identity. As the lead systems architect, he had built much of the company's digital infrastructure from the ground up, brick by virtual brick, pouring his knowledge, his dedication, and a quiet passion into ensuring its security, its efficiency, its very heartbeat. He knew its every hidden pathway, its every vulnerability, its every strength, as intimately as his own pulse. His colleagues respected his quiet competence, his unwavering dedication, often seeking his calm counsel in a crisis. His desk was always immaculate, his code always pristine, his solutions always elegantly precise. He was the quiet sentinel, guarding the digital gates of Nexus Corp, a firm believer in the sanctity of data and the impregnable integrity of the systems he oversaw. For Alastair, his work was more than a job, it was a testament to his core values. Then came Serafina Croft. She arrived like a whirlwind, all sharp angles and sharper ambition, appointed as the new head of cybersecurity. Alastair had initially welcomed her, eager to collaborate, to share his deep institutional knowledge, to see his meticulously built systems evolve under new leadership. But Serafina was not interested in collaboration, she was interested in conquest. Her swift, almost ruthless rise through the corporate ranks was palpable, leaving a faint scent of fear and envy in her wake, like a predator marking its territory. She dismissed Alastair's seasoned wisdom as antiquated, his caution as slowness, his deep understanding of underlying complexities as an impediment to innovation. She implemented new, flashier protocols, often disregarding the subtle, interlocking complexities Alastair had so painstakingly woven into the company's network over a decade and a half. A quiet unease began to gnaw at Alastair, a premonition that settled like a persistent shadow in the corner of his peripheral vision, whispering of fundamental misalignments, a corruption of the very principles he held dear. The digital fortress he had built felt subtly, irrevocably violated. The data breach, when it struck, was catastrophic. It wasn't a mere infiltration, it was a surgical extraction, a precise, devastating siphoning of Nexus Corp's most valuable intellectual property and its entire client database. The company reeled, its stock price plummeting faster than a stone in a well, its reputation in tatters. Panic gripped the executive suite. Investigations were launched, led, ironically, by Serafina herself, who moved with a chilling efficiency, her eyes alight with a cold, almost detached focus. Alastair, the man who had dedicated his life to protecting Nexus Corp's digital heart, found himself at the epicenter of a swirling maelstrom of suspicion, the company's pain twisting into a personal agony. The evidence, painstakingly curated by Serafina's team, pointed directly at him with a horrifying, surgical precision. Log files, seemingly manipulated to show his access at critical junctures, an encrypted communication trail, supposedly from his personal device, detailing the exfiltration, even a few damning, seemingly careless lines of code that mimicked his unique programming signature, yet contained a fatal flaw that only an insider could have introduced, a flaw that screamed setup to Alastair's expert eye. He stared at the fabricated proof, a nauseous wave washing over him. He protested his innocence, his voice cracking with disbelief, a raw, primal cry of injustice lodged in his throat. He pointed to his clean record, his years of loyal service, the sheer illogicality of him destroying the very edifice he had helped build. But Serafina, with her calm, authoritative demeanor, presented her findings with an air of unshakable certainty. She highlighted the inconsistencies, twisted benign actions into malicious intent, and painted a portrait of a disgruntled, overlooked employee finally snapping. The CEO, a man Alastair had admired and served for years, looked at him with a gaze devoid of recognition, replaced by a cold, cutting disappointment that felt worse than any fury. It was as if his very existence, his entire contribution, had been erased. The public disgrace was swift and brutal. The news cycles screamed his name, branding him a traitor, a cybercriminal, the man who brought Nexus Corp to its knees. He was fired on the spot, his access badges deactivated with a cold click, his personal effects unceremoniously boxed and sent to his vacant apartment as if he were a ghost. The severance package was a pittance, barely enough to cover a month's rent in the city. His professional reputation, once spotless, was now irrevocably stained, a scarlet letter branded onto his very career. Calls from headhunters ceased abruptly. Former colleagues, once friendly and supportive, now either avoided his gaze, their eyes darting away in shame, or offered mumbled, half-hearted condolences laced with thinly veiled suspicion. His social circle evaporated, replaced by an echoing silence. Even his closest friends, overwhelmed by the damning evidence plastered across every news channel, whispered about the shocking betrayal. Alastair, who had always defined himself by his work, by his integrity, found himself utterly alone, utterly adrift, a pariah in a world that had once hailed him as a pillar of reliability. Every news report felt like a fresh stab, every averted gaze a new blow. He spent the first few weeks in a haze of despair, shuttling between his empty apartment, its walls closing in like a tomb, and the desolate park, the accusations echoing in his mind like a tormenting chorus. The weight of public opinion, the crushing realization that 15 years of unwavering dedication had been erased in a single, orchestrated blow, threatened to consume him entirely. He stared at his reflection, seeing not the meticulous architect he once was, but a hollowed-out shell, a pariah branded by a crime he didn't commit. The betrayal cut deeper than any financial loss, deeper than any social ostracization. It was a violation of his very soul, a defilement of his core being. He had given them everything, and they had taken it all, leaving him with nothing but a name synonymous with treachery. There were moments, dark, suffocating moments, when the urge to simply give up, to surrender to the narrative they had so skillfully constructed, was overwhelming. The air felt thick, heavy with defeat. But then, a flicker. A tiny, incandescent spark in the suffocating darkness, born of a sudden, searing surge of righteous fury. A memory, buried deep beneath the layers of despair, rising like a phoenix from the ashes, the dead man's switch. Alastair had always been a man who anticipated contingencies, who believed in built-in redundancies, not just for systems, but for integrity itself. Years ago, a nagging intuition, a vague unease about the opaque dealings of certain high-level executives, had prompted him to build a failsafe. It was a complex, multi-layered system, a secret network of encrypted data releases, designed to activate only under specific, extreme conditions. Its purpose was simple: to audit internal dealings and expose any deep-seated corruption if he, the primary guardian of the company's digital ethics, were ever unjustly removed from his post. He had coded it under the guise of an advanced system diagnostics protocol, embedding it so deeply into the core network architecture that only he, and the system itself, knew its true function. It was a safety net for the company, and, ironically, a potential weapon for himself. A weapon of truth. His unjust removal was the trigger. The system had been dormant for years, a silent sentinel, a digital guardian angel waiting in the wings. Now, it was awake, stirred by the gravest injustice. It had begun its work the moment his access credentials were revoked, a series of pre-programmed data packets queued for release. The meltdown was not a single, explosive event, but a slow, agonizing unraveling, designed to inflict maximum pressure and expose the truth piece by damning piece, a digital erosion. Alastair, now operating from the shadows, a ghost in the digital realm he once commanded, began to observe. He set up a secure, untraceable workstation in his apartment, a sanctuary from the digital noise, and started to monitor the feeds, his mind sharpening with a renewed, cold clarity. The first release was subtle, almost imperceptible to the untrained eye. It was 2 weeks after his firing, a quiet torrent of what appeared to be internal audit reports, seemingly benign, uploaded to an obscure, publicly accessible financial data repository. The media barely noticed, dismissing it as digital noise. Nexus Corp issued a terse statement dismissing them as unverified data anomalies. But Alastair saw the tremor. He saw Serafina's public dismissiveness, contrasted with the frantic, private internal communications he managed to intercept, detailing her desperate attempts to locate the source of the leak. She was unnerved. Good. He felt a grim satisfaction grow within him, a seed of hope blossoming amidst the desolation. Alastair spent his days meticulously analyzing the data, cross-referencing, piecing together the fragments, preparing for the next phase. He was no longer just the meticulous systems architect, he was a digital detective, a strategic general, his solitude a crucible that refined his focus to an almost preternatural level. He saw the patterns in the data that no one else could, the subtle fingerprints of Serafina's manipulation, the financial irregularities that pointed towards the siphoning of funds linked to the stolen IP. The despair began to recede, replaced by a cold, burning resolve, a fierce determination that purified his shattered spirit. He had been cast out, but he was far from broken. He was rebuilding himself, brick by painful brick, into something far more formidable. Weeks turned into a month. The second data drop was more significant, a sharp, calculated punch. It was a cache of internal emails, seemingly innocuous marketing discussions, but buried deep within them, Alastair knew, were encrypted metadata tags that pointed to offshore shell corporations previously flagged in his dead man's switch. This time, a few niche financial blogs picked up on it, speculating about unexplained financial flows. Nexus Corp responded with a stronger denial, threatening legal action against unsubstantiated claims. Serafina held a press conference, her smile tight, dismissive, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of anxiety. Alastair, observing her every public and private twitch through his monitor, saw the rapid-fire internal security meetings, the desperate attempts to patch perceived vulnerabilities. Serafina was definitely sweating now, a bead of cold fear trickling down her spine. The meltdown accelerated, each subsequent data release a more powerful detonation. Triggered by Alastair's relentless monitoring of internal network activity, an attempt by Serafina to shut down a specific server, new, suspicious encryption protocol deployed, each was more devastating than the last. One batch exposed high-level discussions about a rival company's new product, suspiciously similar to Nexus Corp's stolen IP, hinting at the true destination of the data breach. The betrayal of intellectual property was a deep cut. Another revealed anomalous server access logs, clearly pointing to a privileged user account that had been active during the original breach, an account Alastair had found suspicious years ago and had therefore flagged in his system. This time, the mainstream media took notice, their headlines screaming betrayal and corporate malfeasance. The stock plummeted further, dragging Nexus Corp into a financial abyss. Analysts questioned the company's integrity, its very foundation. Nexus Corp was forced to issue a formal internal review statement, a clear sign of their escalating desperation, their carefully constructed facade crumbling. Serafina's fear was becoming palpable, a desperate stench in the digital air. Her carefully constructed facade of control began to crack under the relentless pressure of the unknown assailant, this phantom nemesis. She lashed out at her team, accusing them of incompetence, driving them to work around the clock, chasing digital ghosts that seemed to materialize from thin air. She suspected an insider, perhaps someone Alastair had worked with, but she couldn't pinpoint the source. The dead man's switch was too well hidden, too expertly disguised as benign system processes, too deeply integrated into the very fabric of Nexus Corp's network. The irony was exquisitely painful for her. She was trying to fight a system that Alastair, the man she had framed, had embedded years ago, a system now turning on her like a vengeful spirit. Her frustration mounted, her once pristine office now perpetually cluttered with discarded coffee cups and printouts of incriminating logs she couldn't explain. She barely slept, her eyes haunted by dark circles, her ambition slowly consumed by a gnawing dread. She knew, deep down, that exposure was inevitable unless she could find the source and shut it down. But the source was Alastair, and he was long gone, or so she desperately believed. Alastair, meanwhile, was working with a quiet ferocity, fueled by a purpose that transcended mere revenge. The public scrutiny fueled his resolve, sharpening his focus. He had set a trap, and Serafina was walking deeper into it with every desperate, incriminating move she made. He began discreetly feeding carefully curated summaries of the leaked data to a few independent investigative journalists he trusted, journalists who had initially dismissed his claims but were now intrigued by the sheer volume and damning nature of the anonymous leaks. He crafted narratives, explained the technical jargon in accessible terms, guiding them towards the larger truth, always staying encrypted, always untraceable, a phantom whisper in the digital dark. He was not just waiting for the system to act, he was orchestrating a symphony of revelation, each note a step closer to Serafina's downfall, a crescendo of justice. The journey was physically and mentally draining, the solitude profound, but the growing anticipation of vindication, of reclaiming his lost honor, kept him going, fueled by an icy certainty. He was no longer just surviving, he was fighting, and he was winning. The climax arrived with a thunderclap that reverberated through the corporate world, shaking its very foundations. Nexus Corp had scheduled an emergency press conference, a desperate attempt to reassure investors and the public, clutching at the last vestiges of trust. The CEO, pale and visibly shaken, stood at the podium, flanked by a grim-faced legal team and, ironically, a meticulously dressed Serafina Croft, who still maintained a fragile veneer of composure, a tightly stretched smile that barely concealed the terror in her eyes. The financial district held its breath. Alastair, watching from his secluded apartment, had prepared for this exact moment. His dead man's switch, sensing the heightened network traffic around the press conference and recognizing a specific internal inquiry initiated by a now panicked Serafina, released its final, most devastating payload. It wasn't just data this time, it was an intricately compiled, irrefutable dossier that slammed shut the door on any doubt. It contained encrypted chat logs between Serafina and known operatives of Nexus Corp's shadowy rival, detailing her cold, calculating orchestration of the original data breach, her precise instructions for siphoning specific intellectual property, and chillingly, her meticulous plan to frame Alastair Vance, complete with manipulated timestamps and forged digital signatures. Attached were financial records tracing the illicit payments for her services to offshore accounts. The dossier even included a recording, activated by the switch, of a private phone call Serafina had made, gloating about her success and ridiculing Alastair with a cruel, satisfied laugh. This final revelation confirmed not just her complicity, but her profound, malicious intent. The dossier, along with a time-stamped video presentation explaining its contents, was simultaneously uploaded to every major news outlet, financial regulatory body, and social media platform the moment the CEO began his opening remarks. The large screens in the press conference hall, usually displaying Nexus Corp's corporate logo, suddenly flickered. A new image appeared, stark and undeniable, the first page of Alastair's damning digital evidence, bolded headline screaming, "Croft's betrayal." The room erupted into chaos. Journalists shouted questions, a frenzied cacophony, cameras flashed wildly, blinding explosions of light. The CEO's face, initially contorted in confusion, morphed into shock, then utter horror, as he recognized key company documents now publicly displayed, irrefutably linking Serafina to their ruin. He pointed a trembling, accusatory finger at Serafina, his voice catching in his throat. Serafina Croft, her eyes glued to the screen, watched her meticulously built empire of lies crumble before her very eyes, reduced to digital dust. The specific dates, the names, the proprietary code snippets, they were undeniable, a dagger plunged into her heart. Her face, moments ago composed, drained of all color, becoming a deathly white. A low, guttural gasp, choked with rising terror, escaped her lips, quickly followed by a ragged sob. The sensitive microphone picked up her ragged breathing, blasting it through the hall. Her carefully styled hair seemed to wilt, her polished exterior shattering, revealing the frantic, cornered animal beneath. As the video of her own voice, laced with cruel satisfaction, began to play, detailing how she had eliminated the Alastair problem, something snapped within her. The tightly wound spring of her ambition and deceit finally gave way, unleashing pure, unadulterated panic. "No! This is a lie. A monstrous fabrication," she shrieked, her voice high and desperate, completely uncharacteristic of her usual cool, controlled demeanor. She lunged forward, not at the screen, but at a junior IT technician who was frantically trying to shut down the rogue display, her hands clawing, desperate. You incompetent fool! Who authorized this? What is this? Shut it down. Shut it down now." Her eyes darted wildly, bloodshot and unseeing, her polished exterior shattered, revealing the frantic, cornered animal beneath, desperate to escape. Her accusations, her uncontrolled outburst, her desperate flailing, it was all captured live, broadcast globally, proving beyond a shadow of a doubt her guilt, cementing the truth of Alastair's vindication. Her televised panic was her own undoing, the final, undeniable piece of evidence. The fallout was immediate and absolute. Within hours, Serafina Croft was taken into custody, her face a mask of bitter fury and disbelief as she was led away in handcuffs, still screaming denials. The charges against her were extensive: corporate espionage, data theft, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy. Nexus Corp, reeling from the public scandal and the catastrophic loss of trust, issued a series of public apologies, first to its shareholders, then, explicitly, vociferously, to Alastair Vance, the man they had wrongly condemned. The CEO, his own reputation severely tarnished by his misguided trust, announced his immediate resignation, accepting full responsibility for the oversight that allowed Serafina's treachery to fester. The company's stock plummeted to an all-time low, sparking fears of bankruptcy, but a new interim leadership team quickly moved to implement radical transparency measures and begin the arduous, painful process of rebuilding. Alastair Vance, the man once reviled, was now a public hero. News channels, which had once vilified him with sensational headlines, now clamored for his story, eager to portray him as a victim-turned-avenger. Investigative journalists, who had cautiously reported on the early leaks, now praised his ingenuity, his unwavering pursuit of justice, his quiet brilliance. People who had turned their backs on him, former colleagues, casual acquaintances, even a few distant relatives, began to reach out, their messages filled with shame, regret, and thinly veiled apologies. He read them with a detached indifference, a quiet, almost weary triumph. Their apologies felt hollow, arriving only after the truth had set him free, after he had fought his own battle. He accepted a handful of interviews, calmly explaining the intricate details of his dead man's switch and the insidious nature of Serafina's betrayal, not for vengeance, but for the sake of setting the record straight, for restoring his stolen honor. His quiet dignity, even in victory, only solidified his redeemed image. The company, through its new leadership, offered him a full reinstatement, a promotion, and a generous compensation package, a desperate attempt to salvage their own image. He politely declined. His time there was over, a chapter irrevocably closed. Months later, the dust settled. Nexus Corp began its slow, painful journey toward recovery, a humble giant forced to reckon with its internal rot, its hubris. Serafina Croft faced a lengthy prison sentence, her ambition having ultimately led to her complete ruin, a cautionary tale. Alastair Vance, however, had quietly begun a new chapter, one built on his own terms. He didn't return to the traditional corporate world. Instead, he founded his own boutique cybersecurity consulting firm, focusing on ethical AI and proactive threat detection, a firm built on the very principles of integrity and foresight that had defined his career. His reputation for meticulousness and his astonishing story of vindication drew clients seeking uncompromised security, drawn to his unyielding moral compass. He worked from a small, sunlit office, no longer burdened by the demands of a large corporation, but driven by a renewed sense of purpose, a calm resolve. He found peace in his work, in the quiet affirmation of his principles, in the knowledge that he was truly safeguarding digital integrity. The scars of the betrayal remained, deep and indelible, but they had transformed him, hardened him, made him stronger, wiser, and infinitely more discerning. He had lost everything, only to gain something far more valuable, his honor, unequivocally restored, and a profound, unshakable inner peace. And so, the tale of Alastair Vance echoed a timeless truth, that the pursuit of justice, no matter how arduous or solitary, can illuminate the darkest corners and expose the most cunning deceptions. It demonstrated that deceit, however cunningly woven, will eventually unravel under the relentless glare of truth. For in the end, a person's most precious possession is not their wealth or their status, but their integrity, a legacy that, unlike any system, cannot be truly breached, corrupted, or erased.